Thumb up. Okay. Cody is a customer, but he's also a vendor. So it's the best of both worlds. And Cody and I have been working together for at least 4 years now, I'd say.
Yeah, about 4 years.
Yeah. I was interviewing at Platform 9, and I ended up going to Datera.
Yeah,
and we worked with Packet, and then you're at Platform 9, and now you're at Packet.
Yeah, so I was at Platform 9 for 4 years, yeah. So.
Hold on, we got to adjust his microphone a little
Is
bit.
the mic not picking up?
Well, point it straight up.
Point it straight up like
That's
that?
probably a little better.
Is that better? All right, cool.
Awesome. So,
everyone's seen this,
yeah,
right? Hasn't everybody seen this today? It's the, basically we weren't sure of the audience and if you guys would know what CSI is today. Who doesn't know what CSI is by now? And next slide.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so we kind of wanted to keep this pretty conversational and just kind of have a fireside chat, if you will, about what is the landscape of storage today, and if you had to make a decision about going in and figuring out how to do enterprise storage, what are your options? What are your considerations? What do you have to think about, right? And we named this slide DAS, SAN, NAS, oh my, right? It's there's a lot of options out there, and then you kind of need to think about, am I looking for a solution that works on premise? Am I looking for a solution for the cloud or both?
Open source
versus
proprietary.
Yeah, scale out versus scale up. A lot of interesting things in that space, right?
I've been doing data storage for over 20 years now, and I started my career at Veritas Software, and that was what we would call DAS today, in managing local disk. And then we'd also manage external assets, but the technology was a heck of a lot simpler. We were dealing with disks. Disks are very well-known entities in terms of physics. As we start thinking about what is the purpose of storage, it's about supporting an application, right? And you've got boot disks, and you have database disks, and depending on your database, you might have flash space, and it can get very complex. I think one of the goals now from a CSI and from a containers perspective is to try to simplify the application stack, microservices, break stuff apart to make all this easier. But at the end of the day, if you're going to have a stateful application, you still have that fundamental problem: where are the bits stored? And so you start looking at your options.
Right.
We spend at Datera, we spend a lot of time on the more enterprise customers, and for them, sometimes they get applications, they get storage from IT. They can't control it. Is that your situation? Are you building a greenfield? What are you trying to solve for? And then you have the open source. I know you've done a lot with the open source technology.
Yeah, so my old CEO at Platform 9 said I sold more Gluster than Gluster before Red Hat bought them. I was a big fanboy of Gluster FS back in the day and really got into it. And I think still if you Google like how to Gluster, my blog post is like still in the top 5 and it's from like 2016. So got into that, got into the Ceph game. Got really excited about Ceph for a while, and I'm thrilled with what Rook is doing in that space. I think that's really cool. They finally, I think, made Ceph at least swallowable. You can get it up and running, and it kind of works pretty good, and it's not you don't need a rocket scientist to figure it out. So, yeah, but the open source space is also a double-edged sword when it comes to, hey, it's free. Right, but the cost of 3 engineers in Silicon Valley is to run this thing is not very cheap, right? So,
well, then there's also the results. If
Sure.
you're going to roll your own storage system, and you mentioned Gluster,
Yeah.
mentioned Ceph, both very competent projects. Gluster's been around a really long time.
Yeah.
They have different use cases. They solve different problem sets in the data storage space. Maybe it works. Maybe it meets the requirements. Maybe it doesn't. And that's
Sure.
where things get a little sideways, is what happens if you're finding yourself that you've gone down a path, made a massive investment in a technology, and it doesn't do what you need it to do. That's always a painful situation.
Yeah, and so I was talking to the Facebook guys about their, because they were Team Gluster all the way and had a lot of upstream stuff, and they kind of had the same exact thing. So yeah, we made a bet early on Gluster, and now we're kind of having to wind that back, right? So.
Well, they've been huge proponents of Gluster publicly.
Yeah.
But it might not be the right thing for every case, right?
Sure.
So we look at these products we put up here. Hopefully people recognize some of the older ones, like the original NetApp FAS and whatnot. there's also a situation where you're going to be potentially running multiple storage solutions. What you start
Sure.
with in the beginning might not work for you in the future. So it's as you start thinking about storage for containerization, it really goes back to what are your applications. A lot of folks have been talking about databases up here. Traditionally, databases are very transactional. When you start building out a microservice, an individual database might not have a lot of transactions, but if you've got 50,000 of them, you're now dealing with a lot of transactions. So you really need to understand what your requirements are within your storage system. You'll see that I'm not talking about our product. I mean, we could do that, scale out and all that kind of fun stuff. We really talk more about the challenges that you're going to have as you think about how you're going to implement storage. And since it's the Cloud Native Storage Day, I think there's a fair number of storage vendors here. I'd be happy to talk to you about how they solve those problems to see if they line up with what your challenges are.
Yeah, so do you want to go to one of the big challenges that we talked about on the next slide?
Sure.
So, who's seen a data center like this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's been that guy, right?
Who's been that guy? Yeah, so one of the biggest things that a lot of people kind of gloss over is, hey, I'm going to get this really cool fast array or this new software-defined widget that's going to solve all my storage problems. And they aren't really looking into the architecture or the speeds and feeds of what all the plumbing underneath is going to get it to you. How is it going to get there, right? There's different protocols such as iSCSI and NFS, right? There's still a lot of implementations of fiber channel out there.
Especially in enterprise.
If you're looking at things like Gluster and Ceph, they have their own proprietary protocols built in, and a few others do as well that aren't those. NVMe over X Fabrics is starting to become
TCP?
TCP, it's becoming
TCP.
this big deal. And one of the things that we're also, so it's not only what protocol are you going to use, it's going to be how are you going to deliver this, right? Are you going to are you trying to adopt a fully layer 3 network and deliver storage over BGP? Right? Is that something that's, if you're going to have a complete layer 3 network inside your environment, which I work at Packet, we have a completely layer 3 network and we deliver storage via BGP, right? And that was a very big thing that we had to figure out and find a vendor that worked well with us, and trying to solve that problem was fun.
Yeah.
Very
no,
fun.
you bring up a great point, because all shared storage has a transport. It's got to flow over something, right? You could argue how important that is. Historically, Fibre Channel has been the go-to storage fabric, but now organizations are evaluating the health of that space. There's like 2 HBA vendors, a couple of switch vendors. They're at 32 gig as terms of the speed. They're talking about maybe 64 or whatever. On the Ethernet side of the house, we've got startups, you've got NIC vendors competing against each other. Everyone's trying to drive more offload. It's a really vibrant market. And then you start thinking about storage in general. Fibre Channel has been block. That's the protocol you deliver. There's Fibre Channel IP or IP over Fibre Channel. Nobody deploys that. And so now you're saying, I want to have an agile system. I need to provide storage, statefulness to some or all of my applications. And then you're going to look at your application requirements. You say, some of these are going to need NFS. Some of them are going to need to be high performance block. What do I do? It really is pushing the industry to adopt Ethernet as the prime transport for all storage traffic. Then you got the question of you commingle. Are you going to run dedicated switches? Or are you going to have, integrate your service and storage traffic?
Yeah, and so, and I've been doing this cloud thing for a while before it was called cloud, and trying to design very large VMware deployments and trying to figure out how to get the most bang for buck so we could have VMs cheaper than the next guy. One of the hottest things at one point was like, hey, let's get these blade chassis and throw you have 10 gig networking. Whoa, this is super fast, right? We could run all of our storage and all of our networking and all of our everything over this fabric. And it sounded great at the time until we started pushing tons of IOPS and tons of bandwidth, and we didn't. Those blade chassis were not modular enough to allow us to split it back out, and it was interesting, right? So thinking forward on future-proofing that, And one of the things I think we meant to talk about on that last slide was also when you're looking at container native storage and trying to adopt that, are you trying to completely not think about your legacy VMware environment anymore, and I want a dedicated, and just let me build a storage silo just for containers because I don't want to worry about that stuff anymore? Or do you need to consider, I need a product that can still support my legacy workloads, and I need to be able to do this new cloud native stuff as well? So I think that those are some important things to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it goes back to the requirement piece. We're talking about geo-replication or async replication offsite. Is your application going to support that? What does that mean? One of the technologies that VMware pioneered was, I think, SRM, where you could actually do like a test of DR. We could find statistics from the analysts, but most operations that are running DR doesn't actually work. And it's not that the base piece doesn't work, it doesn't work. Like, you could fail over, but then the IPs are all sideways and the application can't start. But if you don't test it all the time, you don't know that kind of stuff. And then you bring that into Kubernetes, maybe it helps, maybe it hurts. This is part of what Kubernetes needs to do to get better, is how do you manage all of that in a real production environment so you can make sure that your failover technology works with your applications and you can resume running things.
Right, and are you going to say, hey, look, our storage platform is what's going to handle that replica set, all of the replication from site to site, or are you running an application that can handle that at the application level, and then maybe the storage doesn't need to take on the burden of doing all of that for you, right? So these are all things to
If you can drive it into the app layer, it's always better. Storage is relatively dumb, receives a block, maybe it pushes it to the other side at some point in the future. Then the application has to deal with it if it's not there. But the other thing I want to go back to on the network piece is in my job, I lead the sales engineers for Datera, talk to hundreds of people on this same journey, different levels. Some of them going to SDS, some of them adopting containerization and worrying about storage. You mentioned as we talk about the networking piece, it is so fundamental to the overall requirements. We were talking at lunch about how do you get a packet to flow from the client directly into the pod. How do you do that without jumping through load balancers? One of the technologies, we talked about this, BGP. And using the routing. There's tons of routing protocols, but BGP is becoming the standard for implementation. Totally cross-switch, so you don't have to worry about a vendor-specific aspect. From a scale, it runs the whole internet. You're not going to get bigger than that. But what's interesting is now if you've adopted that BGP technology, where your Kubernetes nodes are participating as endpoints, and every single port in your data center is a /31. How do you drive that for storage? What do you do? One of our clients over in Europe, they had been buying traditional iSCSI arrays from a major vendor, we'll talk about who, and that was a dual head product. This is typical scale out, worked great for them. It just required absolute backbreaking work to get it to fit into their network. They had to patch it into core, so they distribute these across racks. So now they're doing it with patch cables or into core. They have to make sure all the routing is correct. Whereas the Datera technology came in, and we're enabling them to go in every single rack with what we call storage nodes, so that storage device, and a scale out SAN effectively. But we can integrate into that BGP network just like their clients do. So when we instantiate resources, we can advertise into the BGP routing framework, which means the whole purpose of this, like you guys do a packet, is to say a resource needs to come online. Where is that going to be? When you've implemented this technology, you've removed those constraints. It literally can be anywhere inside the data center, and our storage platform can match that. This is that is the cutting edge. I don't know of anything beyond that in terms of capability. But the point is that you've really got to think about, first question, are you going to build it in someone else's data center, cloud, like Packet, or are you going to build it on-prem? That's number one. If you go to the cloud, the network is somewhat abstracted.
Yeah, and you don't have a lot of control over it. And I think more and more you're going to see this move. Packet was pretty early on, right? 2014, they said, hey, completely layer 3 network. And to be frank, it pissed a lot of people off. Right?
Yeah.
If you need I need a subnet, my application needs to talk over layer 2. What do you mean everything's layer 3, right? And now, 2019, we're starting to see this more and more where everyone's adopting BGP and trying to create an ASN per node and do all of this stuff. So thinking about the future and where things are going when you make your storage bet, I think is extremely important.
Right, and we see this again in the enterprise space. A lot of enterprise customers are moving their data centers to using BGP routing as close to the compute as they can get it. NSX technology helps that in VMware. In the Kubernetes space, you've got like Calico. I think Weave also does this. Yeah,
Weave does that. Metal LB is a big deal.
Yeah.
With BGP involved.
Yeah, and it's I think the conversation at lunch from the administrator's perspective that Cody asked, and this is incredibly important. The question was, how well do you work with your network team? Because traditional enterprises, there's a pretty big wall between the functional organizations. What you really want to be an environment where you have a good relationship with the network team. Because if you don't get the network right, it doesn't matter what you deploy. All storage moving forward is going to be scale out, all of it, whether it's hyper-converged like a vSAN, a Portworx, a Datera, it is going to be how it's going to be. If the network fails, it will fail that product because they have to replicate, they have to talk. So the network integration and how the networking built is fundamental to making stateful applications successful.
Yeah.
How are we doing on time, by the way? Perfect. We have one more slide. Talk about the future.
The future.
Yes. So I want to start it with, I was going to write Moore's Law, and then I thought, actually, it goes well beyond that. Because what are we going to get more of? Absolutely everything, right? We're going to get more IPs in the data center. We're going to get more containers running. We're going to have more bandwidth between containers. We're going to have more memory in a server. How many people are familiar with persistent memory Optane, Intel Optane's technology? So they're talking about being able to put a terabyte DIMM in one of the 24 memory sockets. You could put more than that. You could literally have a secondary class of RAM that is running 10 terabytes in a box. Not this year, maybe a couple years. But the idea is now, this totally blows up everything from the way applications are designed. Because they're used to these very specific requirements of relatively light RAM. I mean, you can still get 1.5 terabytes, but that's not cheap. Light RAM, up to 4.
AMD EPYC Rome.
Yeah, 4 terabytes of DRAM.
Yeah.
Great. Thank God we have virtual addressing, so you hit a speed bump in there and you're not destroyed. Then you get more, like I said, keep getting more. That's what's coming. And that's part of what we're driving to here is to get away from the human intervention of management and get much more to self-service. I mean, fundamentally, that's what Kubernetes is all about.
Yeah, and one of the things that we were looking at in this space also was like what's coming down the pike with CSI, right? What are some of the things that CSI is the new hotness, and a lot of people have been talking about it today. To be honest, I would say 99% of storage on Kubernetes is probably still on a flex volume driver.
Probably. Or Trident, or one of the other.
Yeah.
What is that one from EMC? It was called
I don't know.
Rexray.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's funny. Yeah. And so, but CSI is coming out, and it's almost every vendor has an implementation of it. Yep. It's been GA for 3 releases now of Kubernetes, right? So
1.9 I think was alpha.
Yes, so I think 112, so they're at the 116 now. So 4 releases of Kubernetes, it's been GA. But there's some missing features, right? So folks that have been in the VMware space and folks that have been in the OpenStack space or the public cloud space when it comes to orchestrating storage, things you kind of take for granted is like no downtime migrations of that storage, right? Like, how do I swap out that array I bought last year for that new array because I don't like that vendor anymore? And in VMware and OpenStack, it's very quick and easy to move to that. It's not built into CSI yet. It was supposed to be alpha in 1.16. Didn't quite make the train. But this is something that's coming that's really going to solidify Kubernetes storage so that you can actually say, hey, look, we're going to standardize on this as our orchestration platform. And we're going to choose, one company today and another company tomorrow, and we don't have to worry about that abstraction and be locked into that decision we made because you can move your data through Kubernetes.
The consistency groups, right? I mean, this is old school, typically Oracle, where you have a large number of volumes participating in the same data set, so you have to snapshot them consistently. Every vendor has that implementation. How do you describe that into a Kubernetes model when you're in that self-service, dynamic storage class, stateful set driven world? Because the applications are still going to require this. As a matter of fact, it might be worse as you start looking at some of the distributed applications in the cloud native databases and whatnot, where now you've got maybe 30 machines operating against independent volumes. Do you want to take that snapshot as a consistent snapshot across all of them? How do you restore that? And now it gets on a per application basis.
Sure.
But those basic functionalities that existed within storage products, as people are lifting and shifting applications, it's a very simple aspect to say, how many apps can I move over? If you require that functionality, can you move it or not? How much money does the company have to spend to rewrite it? Because that's really what's going on, is that we finally found not to say VMware is bad in any way, shape, or form, but Kubernetes, I think, is being adopted by the industry as saying, this is the future.
Right.
A scale out like a MongoDB or Cassandra, pick your poison, is going to be the future. Let's invest in shifting those applications. But how much of what you had to do in the past do you have to bring with you in order to maintain an application for the business? I mean, I know organizations that are moving off of mainframes and rewriting their apps into Cassandra. How are they going to run those? That's where Kubernetes comes in and is fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. So object storage is something else that's coming into the CSI driver, right? So that's coming down the path, so start looking for that, for it to be familiar with how to handle object storage and be able to use it as a backup target and things like that.
Consistent description to get the resources you need. It doesn't matter what the protocol is.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's, so I guess packets first, going from left to right. So I'm Cody, I'm with Packet. I'd like you guys to come check us out at KubeCon. We have a booth, S49, right? So come stop by. And if you'd like to try out Packet, we're a bare metal cloud provider, so you get a physical piece of hardware, put whatever you want on it. We have a promo code Datera50, you get $50 in free credits. So if you're going to take a picture of a slide, this is the one, because it has the promo code on it, right?
Free money.
You can get a physical server and around 60 seconds to spin it up, and you can run that thing in
3 minutes to full Kubernetes, is that what you told me?
Yeah, you can deploy a Kubernetes cluster. I have a demo that will deploy Kubernetes in about 3 minutes on bare metal. So pretty interesting.
And then my name is Bill. I'm with Datera. If you have any questions about how we do things and what our take is. Again, we wanted to talk more about our experiences with building it than necessarily diving into a particular product. We're in the back of the booth. We got a pop-up so you can find us. Just come find us if you have any questions about that.